Hello, everyone. I'm going to talk to you today about our solution, I guess I would call it, for smart working. At Thales, we call it smart working, and I'm going to explain what I mean by smart working, but essentially it incorporates flexible working, hybrid working, all the great things that David was talking about. I hope everyone can hear me okay. So yeah, I'm going to talk about Thales, who we are. I think there are some things at Thales that make it easier to achieve flexible working, and there are some things about our organisation that make it harder. So I'm going to talk about that, talk about our solution, and then I'm going to talk about the lessons and the impact. And also I've got 3 takeaway points as well. I've also got Anne Tickner on the line, who's also a Thales employee. So Anne, either at the end or throughout the presentation, might add some further information. So who are Thales? Not many people have heard of Thales, but most of you will have used Thales technology at some point. We secure most contactless payments, most credit card payments. We're one of those companies that most people use, but not many people have heard of, because a lot of our business is business to government rather than business to consumer. But we are a global organisation. We're headquartered in France. We're multi-industry, so we're defence, aerospace, transportation, space and security. That adds its own complexities, because I know one of the questions that came in for David was around how do you achieve this kind of thing with 3 very distinct or very different businesses and different cultures, and we've definitely got that in our business. We're a matrix structure, so anyone who's tried to create change within a matrix will know how complicated that is. We're largely hierarchical. We are starting to shift to more agile ways of working, starting to flatten some hierarchies, but that's a work in progress. So that brings some challenges. And also we're a very, very traditional organisation. We've got a really long legacy, a legacy we're very proud of, but with that it brings traditional ways of working. So we're not a startup where we get to design this stuff from scratch. We're trying to unpick and undo a lot of habits that have been very baked into the way that we do things. But at Thales, thankfully, we have some very, very open-minded leaders who are leading the way on this stuff. We've got world-class family policies. I myself, I've just come back off 8 months maternity leave. My partner Ryan is currently, he also works at Thales. He's currently on 4 months fully paid paternity leave. So we get 6 months fully paid leave, regardless of whether you're a mum or a dad. The fact that Ryan and I both work at Thales mean that we could carve that up how we wanted to. But for me, I don't know any other organisation that has such great family policies. They really are world class in my opinion. Smart working is something that we've been working on for 4 years now. I know David said that they've been working on it for a number of years as well. This isn't new to us. We aren't done yet. We've got a lot of work to do still, but this isn't something that we're starting because of the global pandemic. This is something that we were already quite far down that journey before the pandemic came, and it certainly helped us to adapt in readiness for the pandemic. Wellbeing is something that we're heavily investing in at the moment, particularly on the technology side with apps and systems to help monitor and understand wellbeing. And also IS transformation. So I'm going to talk later about how hybrid and flexible working, it shouldn't really be seen on its own. So Thales is an organisation that deals with highly secure information up to government secret level. It means that plugging in, logging on in a cafe or logging on a train isn't always possible because of the types of information that we deal with. So that makes this kind of way of working more difficult. Even logging on at home, there are some people that deal with information within our business that some of our offices have eyes only rooms where you have to leave all technology behind and go in. But that is the exception rather than the rule. And there's a tendency for organisations to tar everyone with the same brush and say, because we can't offer this to everybody, then nobody gets it. And we've learned from that, and we now have different ways to deal with that, which I'm going to talk about later on in the presentation as well. So that's a bit about us. I talked about smart working rather than using the term flexible working, and this is simply what I mean by that. So flexible working is along the bottom there, and that talks about when you work and where you work. So that'll incorporate things like part-time working, compressed hours. Where you work will be whether you work from home, in the office, virtual teams. But we've also put a layer on top of that, which is how you work. So whether you work in an agile way, whether you're IT enabled. Obviously, our security restrictions mean that it's been a more difficult thing to achieve to allow people to just log on from home. I know on my first maternity leave after my first son, I had to go into the office to get all the security updates on my laptop before I could log on. Whereas this time, I literally just logged on after 8 months and was able to instantly access everything I could before. So we've come a long way in terms of getting around some of those security barriers. Also, workspace optimized. I know that was one of the questions that came in for David, but it's really important that organizations have been thrown into this world. And for some people, that means having to work on their bed. They haven't got an office. They haven't got a dedicated desk space. They're working in bedrooms, and that isn't optimal, and that isn't ideal. And nobody can be their best, working at their best in those kind of environments. So it's about organizations making sure that wherever you're working, that your environment is safe and it gets the best out of you in terms of your productivity and your engagement. So we've added workspace in there as well. So that's what we term as flexible working. You'll see here that for us, it's a number of things make up the puzzle. Smart team working, so that is around how you work. So David talked about going into the office being collaborative space, some working from home. In my team, we have lights on hours, which is a couple of hours on a Tuesday where everybody's online. It's only between 1 and 3. It works for everybody, but it's a time where we know we can collaborate virtually. And other than those lights on hours, we work whenever and however suits. Smart management, it's around managers understanding the benefits of this and facilitating it rather than blocking smart working. Smart flexibility, which is understanding the benefits of different work setups, different ways of working. Tools and technology I've talked about, which is making sure that you've IT enabled, making sure you've got everything you need to be able to effectively work from home, such as good connection. I know that Thales are helping people and funding people's boosters for their Wi-Fi's and things so that they can get good connections from home. Smart workspaces, which I just talked about. It's not okay to be working in a cramped environment at home. This isn't what we mean by home working. Everybody should have a good space that is aligned to health and safety regulations so that they can work comfortably from wherever they are. And smart meetings and travel. I'm sure you've all been there. I know I've traveled to Paris for a 3-hour meeting and I just thought I could have done this online. And there are many examples of years ago where we were doing that kind of thing, whereas in the last few years that's completely stopped. It has so many benefits to flexible working, and obviously we all know now that it has huge benefits for the environment as well, which is something that is also, this type of activity also benefits hugely. So at Thales, we saw smart working as something that was done by design. This isn't something that happens by accident. There may be people on the call here today who have been thrown into this world as a result of the pandemic. And there are organisations that I'm sure think that they're achieving smart working because they are now got people working from home. But I think this is something that is it needs to be tackled strategically. It's not something that you just haphazardly, stumble upon and expect it to work. So it's a strategically led activity in Thales. It's been 4 years in the making. We have been trialling it. We've been piloting it. We've rolled it out through the UK now. We've got 6,500 employees in the UK, just for context. So it's something that it's based on evidence and it's based on science. It's not based on just anecdotal, we think this is a good thing to do, so we're going to try it. It's based on some really founded evidence and science behind how we've tackled this. And the reason that's important is because organisations who are thrown into this and they find that they have just adapted to the pandemic, but it's not something they've thought of strategically, they've just kind of haphazardly found themselves in a home working environment or a hybrid environment. is that actually negatively impacts the groups that we're trying to help through this flexible working. We're trying to get more diversity into our workplace, and actually by not thinking it through as a strategic activity, it hinders diversity. Some of these statistics, 1 in 4 women are considering leaving their jobs, cutting back hours and scaling back work as a result of the pandemic. And it also hinders the progress made to gender diversity in terms of C-suites, getting women into the C-suite. So unless this is seen as something that is a strategic activity, then it risks hindering diversity rather than helping it. So smart working for us, we came up with, this is a number of years we came up with this, but this is our vision and mission. I won't go through all of these because I will share the presentation afterwards, but some of the things that are really important, and David touched on these, was that we now focus on work outcomes rather than presence. There's so much research that says just because you're chained to a desk 9 to 5, it's a misnomer to think that you're actually productive during that time. And in fact, there's some evidence to suggest you're only ever productive for about 2 to 3 hours of that time. I know myself, I get my best ideas when I'm driving, I get my best ideas when I'm running. So to chain me to a desk wouldn't get the best ideas out of me. I had a work call the other day in the woods. I took my dog for a walk into the woods, and I had a work call with one of my colleagues, and it was great. It was just a lovely way to do something that I normally would have been chained to my desk to do. And I don't have to ask permission to work in that way. It's just how we do things. It's up to us, and we're trusted to work in that way. And then I won't go through all of these because there's some things at the end of this presentation that I want to get to, which I think are really interesting in terms of thinking how we can implement this. So some of the things that we did, I talked earlier about tarring everyone with the same brush. I'm really interested to hear Jane's thoughts on how you achieve such a thing in the NHS, because we have some people in our organisation who work on the shop floor. So we've got people in manufacturing, we've got scientists in labs. Working from home just isn't possible for them. They can of course have flexible working patterns. That's completely open to them. Oh, my presentation's doing a thing of its own now. So what we did was we categorised people into 3 categories, which was anchor, connector and technical. We found that anchors, there's actually very few anchors. These are people that need a full-time desk and will spend most of their time in the office. There was an assumption when we first did this piece of work that people like our executive assistants, our HR shared services centre, which operates a bit like a call centre, there was an assumption that, they need to be there, they need to be in the office. And actually, we've completely smashed that assumption now, particularly with COVID proving that that's not the case. The technology needed to be enabled for them to do their work from home, but they're no longer classed as anchors. These are people that, with the right technology, can actually work anywhere. They don't have to be in the office. There's connectors, so I'm a connector, somebody that doesn't need a desk on site, but rather a place to touch down, plug and play when they do need to be on site. And then there's technical people who they're in the labs, they're on the manufacturing floor, so it's a lot more difficult for them to achieve full flexibility, but there is still options for them. And what we found by doing this piece of work is that we discovered that the majority of people are connectors in our business. This will be different for all different businesses depending on the nature of your work. But what we tended to do before smart working became something that we invested in was that we kind of said, because some people have to be in the office and have to be in the labs, we can't offer this to anybody. So it was almost, again, like tarring everyone with the same brush, and it meant that we couldn't, because we can't offer it to everyone, we don't offer it to anyone. Well, we completely changed that now, and completely considering that most people are connectors, it's something that for the majority of our organisation, they can have absolute flexibility. And where you are an anchor or a technical, you can still have flexibility, but it has different parameters around it. So understanding the distribution of our organisation against these 3 categories was really a useful exercise for us. There's also a piece of work that we've done recently off the back of the pandemic with a company called Dragonfish helped us to do this. And they've done it for Thales, but I know they're looking to do this UK-wide as well. is to put people into different categories, because for managers to effectively manage their teams, it's useful for them to know what types of people they've got in their team and how they like to work. So they came up with, I think it's 5 or 6, it's 5 categories. So the natural, these are people who just thrive outside of the normal structure of an office. You've got the overstretched. So this is an interesting one from a psychological standpoint. I find this really interesting. These are people who, without the physical barrier of getting into your car and commuting home and not being in the office, they really struggle to know when to turn off, when to switch off, when they are working from home, probably even so when they were working in the office as well. These are people that have, they really struggle to strike that balance, the work-life balance. You've got the hybrid. So this is the person, this is probably where I sit, someone who enjoys a mix of remote days and also in-office days. From David's research, it looks like that this is probably quite a popular category in terms of people want to do a bit of both. They want to have the luxury to be able to choose. The newbie. So there was a piece for us around how do you induct people into an organisation remotely? How can they really get a feel for the culture and what the organisation is about? So we put them into a category of their own. And then we've got the reluctant recluse, which is the types of people that you really need to be careful of at a time like this, which are the people who really struggle with the solitude of remote working. I've got a number of colleagues that are in this kind of category where they really, really are missing the collaboration. They're missing the one-off conversations that happen in work. They really value that way of networking face-to-face. And being at home during the pandemic is something that is, they're really, really struggling with. So understanding how people fit into these categories, again, has been useful for us to help our managers understand how they can protect and look after their team's well-being. So the point, there's a second half of my presentation. So the first half was this: we have a strategic solution that's been ongoing for 4 years. We're now in kind of phase 2 of that. This is something that we thought through. On paper, it's world class. It's an amazing solution. It's inclusive. It thinks everything through. It's research and evidence based. But there is, as anyone who's dealt with change in organisations knows, this stuff is only ever as good as the people who are bringing it to life. And for us, that's the managers. So for us, the success of smart working was really down to the managers. They were pivotal to the success of this change. So we looked at the traditional mindset versus the smart working mindset. So we've got, I'm sure this will be familiar to many of you who are on this journey as well. I said earlier that Thales is a very traditional organisation. So we do have a lot of people in the kind of left-hand boxes, where you're managing by presence, command and control, a resistance to change. And where we need to be is management by results, so focusing on outputs rather than time spent in the office, somebody who embraces change, people who smart working is just the way they do things, and they don't need to be convinced of its benefits because they just inherently, they just understand that it's a better way to work. That shift isn't something to be underestimated. So we found, and I found through any change that I do in the organisation, people sit into one of 3 camps. You've got some people, and these numbers are indicative, but just to show you kind of the balance that anecdotally I feel that we're at in terms of making this change. So there's a percentage, around 15% of our managers just get it. They do it already. They weren't waiting for smart working to come about. They were just doing this anyway. They don't seek permission to work in this way. These are the people we want to use as change agents. These are the people that kind of case study that this stuff works. The vast majority of our managers fit in this camp that say, I get it, I'm a bit on the fence. I'd like to work like that, but I'm not quite sure how. They're waiting for permission to work like that. They're a little bit out of their comfort zone, but with the right support and with the right communication, they'll get there. And they're the people that you really want to put a lot of energy into, because they're the people, they're the bulk of the organisation, and they're the managers that will really, with the right support, will tip into that kind of camp at the other end. And then, of course, like any change, we've got a percentage of people that are resistant. It just feels far too foreign for them. they're not necessarily open to working in this way. They're unaware of their own biases and how they're kind of restricting them, and they're not very open-minded to this change. So I think understanding as well the managers that you have that are so important for this change, understanding the percentages you've got and where they sit is really useful to know how you tackle this. So this is where I'm a psychologist, and we look at how you help people perform best in their role, what helps us predict performance for people. And one thing that we've realised is that at Thales we have a tendency to, we take on fantastic engineers. We employ some of the best engineers in the world. We employ them because they're fantastic at their job as an engineer, and then we promote them and say, brilliant, now you can manage a team. We were at risk of not recognising that the management responsibility is completely different to what we hired them for, which is engineering. So this is just illustrative, but this is an example based on anecdotal evidence and also evidence out in the research around what it takes to be a great engineer versus what it takes to be a great manager. Engineers make up the bulk population of our organisation, which is why I have these engineers here. So we hire engineers because they are fantastic problem solvers. They have high attention to detail. Some of our engineers are working on safety critical things, and their attention to detail is an absolute must when we bring them on. They're systematic thinkers, they're logical thinkers, and these are all the great qualities of our engineers that we look for when we're hiring them. Whereas likewise, our managers, we need them to be problem solvers, but actually we want them to collaboratively problem solve. So we don't want them to take that burden on by themselves. We want them to use the team. Do we need them to be logical thinkers? Not necessarily. We need them to be strategic thinkers. So think about a football manager who is thinking about how best to place their players to get the best out of them. That's what we want our managers to have. We want them to be really high on the strategic thinking. We want them to be curious as well. We want our engineers to be equally as curious. Attention to detail. What we find is if we have managers who are too high on this scale, that they tend to do the doing for the team rather than trusting the team to do it by themselves. So if we have a fantastic engineer in a management role, there is a risk that they might, rather than taking a helicopter view, they get into the weeds. And we want our managers to be up taking a helicopter view of the team and making sure that they're positioning in the best way to get the best out of them. So the profile looks different. And it's not to say that great engineers can't be great managers, because we have people that can do both. And, I'm a believer in the growth mindset, and that people can adapt and they can move into these new positions. But for some people, it's working against their natural preferences, and it's working against what we hired them for. And it's a stretch too far to ask them to suddenly be something different. And by understanding this different profile of what we're looking for between our managers and engineers, I know David touched on that around technical capability versus leadership capability. Hopefully this kind of depicts the fact that this is where some of your resistance to change might come from. And focusing on your managers is something that I would, if you're an organisation and you want to create this culture and this environment, putting all your time and energy into your managers is one of the best ways to spend your time, because they are so pivotal, particularly in an organisation as large as ours, where we have 6,500 people. Our managers are pivotal to that change. So decoupling routes to promotion with managing people, and value the role of the manager for what it is. Managing is a very, very difficult thing to do, and it's different to usually the technical role that we employ people for. So recognising that is so important to this. I put this in, I know we'll all be aware of Mother Pucker on this conference call, but I put this in, she put it up, I put it in the wrong order, sorry. But this was a Joe Biden quote that he showed that when he was vice president, he told his teams, I want you to be going to events, to things that you should be going at. You shouldn't be missing your kids' plays. You shouldn't be missing funerals. You shouldn't be missing really important events. You shouldn't be missing the day-to-day things that are so important to our well-being because of work. And if somebody in his position can make flexible working work, then there's literally no excuse for anyone else, really. And that's why I put this in, just to depict that. Just some 3 takeaways for me. So Design your solution to flexible working based on evidence and facts. It isn't a CSR activity. This isn't a nice to have. This isn't something you're doing as a favour. It's not a problem to solve, as David said. This is good for business, and base it on evidence and base it on facts. This isn't something that is fluffy. It is scientifically validated. Invest in your people managers. I hope that came through my presentation. And the last takeaway point for me is evaluate. Organisations tend to underinvest evaluation, but if you put in place a solution such as our smart working solution, make sure you're taking baseline measures, you're measuring success all the way along so that you can prove and case study how this is working, because that group of managers that are in the middle that need convincing, they need more support, this is the stuff that's going to pull them up into operating in the way that you need them to operate. This is, I know it shouldn't need proof, but I work with engineers, with scientists, that evidence and facts are what speak to them. And so if we can give that to them and prove that these things are working, then they're more likely to buy into it and then more likely to just model that behaviour. So that is a whistle-stop tour of Thales, what we're doing. I hope that was useful. I'm now going to open the floor to questions.